Hello, Jason. How are you doing?
I am well as to be expected in these interesting days we are living through. We are living in history, and that's always an awkward feeling sometimes, I think.
I don't know about you, but I've heard stuff you've talked about echoed by much more influential people, and it's weird being in a spot where a conversation you had that maybe went out to 10,000 people is being echoed by much larger voices, and I got to commend you for doing a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you.
Having those kind of conversations, but it's still a strange place to be.
I mean, again, it's down to my guests more than anything. I mean, I'm no economic mind of any kind, but once you get put onto something and you start digging, I think the only thing that I can possibly give it is some sort of legitimacy. Not that I'm anybody of note yet or ever, but I think my contribution is humanizing it to a degree where the conversation isn't just being had in controlled environments or by monologuing. Tom Luongo is amazing and great, but when you go onto his sites, he's getting into quite often deep dives into economic theory and stuff that will lose most people. So I get to be a bit of a normie filter on that one, going, please explain to me how money works, Tom or Stormy. Please explain these things.
So I was just talking with a friend who's got multiple children like I do. And if you have a 4-year-old and a 15-year-old and you're teaching them both math, if you teach the 15-year-old the 4-year-old's math or vice versa, you're making a grave mistake. And some people are doing nonlinear equations and some people are doing their times tables. And there's nothing moral that attaches to either one of those as long as it's appropriate for them to be doing what they're doing. Like, for a third grader to be doing their times tables is appropriate. If you're attempting to be in like a PhD math program and still struggling with your times tables, then that's something like that's wrong. Like you shouldn't be doing that.
I think you just described the current state of academics in the
right.
West, however. I'm pretty accurate,
yes.
Unfortunately.
Well, therein lies the problem, right? That's why, I put on my, dissident professor hat and I basically do college lectures. A man I've admired for many years, Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson, who's also an Orthodox priest, PhD in history. He's just done, university lectures for probably 15 years and done it without institutional support because there's no support for true things in the academy these days.
Did you ever listen to, there's an audio recording on YouTube, Father Seraphim Rose talking at, I believe it was Berkeley, but I might be mistaken, and he did a lecture on the eschaton, the signs of the end times, which is quite interesting. I recommend anyone listening to go check that out. I think Father Seraphim, who I believe will be made to a saint soon, I think is one of the most relevant Orthodox thinkers.
I'm a hardcore traditionalist Catholic, and we have some major ecclesiastical differences with Father Rose, but nevertheless, I think he's a valuable thinker because he took liberalism to its end conclusion, saw that it was evil, and went down to the root and said, this is wrong, and here's why. I think he's a very, very valuable thinker for a lot of people. You can't be more big L liberal than a Berkeley homosexual in the 70s. He went to that dark place and through the grace of God came out the other side and didn't just be like, well, everything was okay in 1925 and we just got back to then, it would have been all right, would have been better, which is what the classical liberals like James Lindsay or others want to do, is they want to go 5 exits up the highway and go down the same road and be like, well, but we're driving off the cliff, but we want to just go, up the same road, 5 exits and keep going down the same path.
It's kind of paramount to my understanding of my prediction for the neo-trads, the thing that will kind of replace the woke, which a lot of woke isms in it, but it'll become much more coded, traditional, conservative. Because the liberals all want to go back to 1995, and the conservatives all want to go to 1955, and I think they're going to settle somewhere around 1985, which is a very Gen X kind of era. And,
right. Well, that's Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is like the Democrat from, if you listen to Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton's inaugurals from 1992, he sounds more conservative than Donald Trump now. He rejected gay marriage. He didn't explicitly endorse homosexuals in the military. He talked about illegal immigration being, a problem. This is the problem with large L, capital L liberalism as such. I'm reactionary is reactionary, right? I'm religiously reactionary. I'm politically reactionary. I don't believe in democracy. I don't believe in universal suffrage. I don't believe in parliaments. I'm pretty far to the right, but there's still societies where I can say, I would probably be on the left in 16th century Tsarist Russia. But liberalism as such doesn't admit that there might be a place that you can stop. You always have to progress. Like the idea of progress is enshrined as like this thing that we pursue and that we can attain somehow. That's an unqualified good to progress. The job of the conservative is to prevent people from, on the road to perdition, prevent people from turning around, right? The sane man goes, oh, we're on the road to perdition. We should turn around and go the other way. The liberals' idea is that they should go faster down the road to perdition. And the conservatives' idea is to tell people, nope, you can't turn around. You have to slow down. This has led to all kinds of problems. We're talking here today because our mutual friend Pete Quinones introduced us. And I was talking with Charles Spadil last night. Half a century. 1975 is basically 50 years ago. It was 70 years since Brown v. Board. By 1975, like any idea of the colorblind society was like not just like dead, but like what happened to Rasputin levels dead, right? Like they'd shot it a couple times, drowned it, strangled it a few times, like
poisoned it.
Like
still wouldn't die, just like
right, yeah, like
burn it at the stake, yeah.
Like by 1975, it was just obvious that this was not going to work. It was going to fail. Between the riots and the chronic underperformance in schools and perpetual lack of marriage and like whatever you want to say, by 1975, it was obviously clear that this race-blind, colorblind meritocracy was a failure, dead on arrival. And it was like 20 years after Brown v. Board, basically. And in the 50 years since, we've just lied to ourselves continually about whether or not that, like, oh, this is obviously, it's going to work just around the corner. Conservatives, right? Oh, we just need to go back to Martin Luther King's dream. I mean, racist communism for Black people, right? Leftists are actually, I think this is something you've talked about, the woke are more correct than the conservatives.
I'll say this, to go back to Father Sermon for a little bit, and just to add on to it, what he really triangulated in my mind was that the whole thing is liberal. If you're right wing or left wing, you're playing within this liberal frame.
Right.
And as long as you're in the liberal frame, you're stuck in it. This is something that Dugan goes on about as well. What I've coded the liberalism itself is liberalism is Luciferian. The end result in liberalism as an ideology, and all the offshoots of it, is to liberate man from God. And once you understand that, and that's the project, everything else makes sense. So to go back to what you said about the woke and conservatives, the woke are more consistent with liberalism than any other group because they are trying to liberate us from history, from rulership, from concepts, from principles, and ultimately from God.
Correct. The greatest Catholic prelate of the 20th century, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, the founder of the Society of St. Pius X, when he was talking to his young priests in the 70s, shocked them all by saying, "You are all children of the revolution. I am a child of the revolution." Now, this is a man who, his father rejected liberalism. He rejected liberalism. He was a Catholic archbishop. He refused to say the new mass, founded a priestly society that's been going for 50 years of refusing to bend the knee to the modernists take over the church. And yet, even he himself recognized that he was a child of the revolution. He couldn't help it. I said on Telegram quite a while ago that the goal of liberalism is to turn every individual into their own worst version of Milton's Satan. Non serviam as a telos. And that was me 3 years ago. That's the point of liberalism. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The whole goal of feminism is to say, I don't want to be a wife and a mom or a religious sister. The whole goal of political liberalism is I don't want to serve a king locally, right? I don't want to find my place in the hierarchy and serve loyally in it. I mean, there are disputes, certainly. Charles V as the Emperor of Spain and of Austria, just of Italy and the Low Countries. Is he acting as the king of Spain? Do Spaniards owe him something when he calls them to go die in the Netherlands to, maintain control of the Low Countries? I don't know. That's a question for theologians, and I'm not one. But that's not saying I will not serve. That's saying, can this man be both the king of Spain and the king in the Low Countries? That's not saying that kings aren't real. That's the problem we have now, right? Is that all of our frames are liberal. And you can see it. The post-war consensus is cracking, and you have all these boomers who were raised by television who just can't understand that the post-war consensus is, in and of itself, an artifact of liberalism. Here in America, George Wallace was reelected to stuff into the 1980s because so many people in Alabama recognized that the post-war consensus was wrong about conditions in Alabama. It just wasn't morally wrong, as it was just factually wrong. And one of the things about the post-war consensus, about the liberal order, is it permits no understanding outside itself to exist.
This is my constant rebuttal to the accelerationists, because what I sometimes hear a lot about in our space and other spaces as well is that this idea that if things get really, really bad, then you'll almost jumpstart the system to get good. Like you have to go through all the bad to get to the good. But again, this is where that liberal frame comes into play, is that you can't conceptualize the good. If we're saying that all this bad stuff is in a direct or indirect result of the liberal frame, then you have to get out of liberalism. But we don't have anything outside of liberalism to go to. Other than, let's say, religion, my hope is to die fully orthodox. In our tradition, we have a term for it. It's phronema, which some people would say is a worldview. It's one of those Greek words that does a lot of things, but essentially, you could really say it's a state of being. So that when you're in a full state of phronema, in an orthodox phronema, you think orthodox, you live orthodox, everything is orthodox. That becomes your frame. Then your personal frame, or let's say the orthodox frame, can that exist inside liberalism? I don't know. Probably not, because we'll probably get wiped out.
No, it can't.
We're getting wiped out as it is. But at least to your dying day, you're in the right frame. You might be in this world that is constructed by liberalism, but you're doing everything you can to not contribute to it. This is, I think, really render unto Caesar what is his, render unto God what is his. I think that is like the true definitional understanding of what Jesus said when he said that.
But hold on, just to go back to liberalism for a second, right? Liberalism permits nothing outside itself. James Kolb talked about this in Tyranny of Liberalism. Great book if you haven't read it.
I think Dugan says something like, I'm going to paraphrase here, is that it's not personal. You can be anything you want as long as it's liberal.
Yes. I mean, that's very true. But so you're familiar with the anathemas surrounding 1054 and later like Council of Florence or whatever. Someone could be a Roman who fully believes the Orthodox are wrong about the ecclesiastical structure of the church, the filioque, whatever other issues there might exist between East and West. And they can still understand why the Orthodox think what they think. Disagree with it, but understand it. And vice versa. Someone who was Orthodox and lived in that Orthodox world could sit down and say, this is the case the Romans make, and here is why they make this case. And I believe they're wrong for these reasons. Or the Protestants. This is why Luther thinks what he thinks and why they're wrong. And you can see it, back and forth throughout the religious debates between the Catholics and the Protestants, the Orthodox and the Protestants, the Catholic and the Orthodox, vice versa. Mostly, there is a great deal of Christian charity there, and they can say, okay, this is why they think what they think, and here's why they're wrong. Liberalism permits none of that, because to step outside of liberalism is, under liberalism's frame, to be evil. It's very Manichaean in a certain sense of like the only permissible framing is liberalism or evil.
What really started setting off my alarm bells, and I had been going through a progression since around 2014, but the lockdowns, COVID, I visualize liberalism as the art of stacking contradictions in your mind. I use the image of a cartoon where it's the dish pit where the dishes are piled to the roof, and all it takes is just one more contradiction to go pink, and the whole thing collapses. And either go crazy, or you turn towards God, or maybe in my case a bit of both. And I remember watching a George Floyd protest, a kneel-in the park outside my house in Montreal, Canada. And I looked at that, and at that time I was softening, but still very much an atheist, coming from an atheist mindset and a skeptic. And I saw that as a religious ceremony. And I knew
because it was
atheist. Yeah, exactly, and undeniably, and that's all it took. My brain was like, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute with any of the other priors and contradictions that are stacked in my head about liberalism. It has to go.
Right. And there's a gentleman, I can't remember his name, and he's kind of disappeared. But he wrote an article that blew my mind probably about 10 years ago called "The Church with No Salvation." And that's liberalism. They have sacraments. They have high priests. They have everything full fig Orthodox Church would have, right? If they have their sacraments, they have their, weekly mass attendance of like, oh, you didn't listen to All Things Considered this week? What's wrong with you? Like you missed the same way that if you missed liturgy on Sunday, like a friend of yours will call you and be like, Jason, didn't see liturgy. You all right, buddy? And, you can be either like, well, I was really sick and like, oh, I'm not feeling very good, which might or might not be true. Or you can be like, oh, I'm a terrible person and missed liturgy. But someone will ask you, and if you're sick, someone will be like, oh, well, we'll have a babushka train, like bring you soup. And there'll be 3 or 4 babushkas who will bring you soup and be like, you must get better. But there will be a context of like, why did you fail to participate in the community liturgy? And if you'd failed, you will have either a valid reason or invalid reason. And for some people, like missing morning edition Sunday is the equivalent of like missing church.
I guess trigonometry is making a really good play at being the new pulpit, I think.
Right, but just like in Australia or in Canada, right? Like for some people, the CBC is their religious authority in their lives.
I have people who are in Australia. It's the ABC, Australian Broadcasting, and I've had conversations like I had to stop. Like I'm talking to a news anchor. Like I'm not talking to this person. None of their ideas are their ideas. Every time you disagree or yell at a boomer, you're just yelling at the TV set, and the TV set doesn't care.
Things are very difficult in Canada at the moment, right? They have the cost of living of California and the wages of Mississippi. I mean, like it's bad. The lockdowns were terrible. Justin Castro's obviously like a joke. And somehow tens of thousands of Indians per month are arriving in Canada. It's one thing to have like Vancouver or something like that be heavily immigrant, but you're getting little towns in like Newfoundland. To go from St. John's, Newfoundland to Victoria it's like the equivalent of going from like Lisbon to Kazakhstan.
Native Newfoundlanders don't want to live in Newfoundland. So when you're shipping people in there, like, what the fuck are you doing? There's nothing there. It's a bunch of rocks and some fish. What are you doing? I heard something interesting, and I haven't done the diligence on this, so, whatever. But apparently a healthy percentage of East Indians are actually now leaving Canada because they find it too intolerable to live there. Because the wages are so shit, and then no one can afford a house and all that stuff. So they actually have made people who worship rats and have rat temples in their house go, well, let's go back to Delhi. At least there you can get a good I don't know what, but yeah, I thought that was interesting.
I think that we've talked about this previously. I remember about 10 years ago, I was talking with some friends who were Canadian, and someone brought up housing prices even back then, and like a garage in Vancouver was like $500,000. This Sunlit Upland's vision of Canada as like the post-national nation state. Canada is in many ways like the Liberals' ideal. It's a failure on its own terms, and they're not mentally prepared to deal with that. Now, you and I could deal with that comfortably, actually, of like this. Of course, this is why Canada has failed. You've done this, this, and this that are all, contra success. Canadians are Yukis and the people on the red ensign, and that's it. And for them to attempt to make the whole world Canadian, well, then being Canadian is meaningless. And I know that Canadians love the NHL, which is an ironic name considering that half the teams are Canadian. But people who are fresh off the boat do not care what Coach Cherry thought about Hockey Night in Canada, right? And if Hockey Night in Canada is your only touchstone for what it means to be Canadian, being Canadian is meaningless.
There was, when I was growing up, I'm 47, so growing up in the late 70s, throughout the 80s and 90s, now, granted, I was born and raised in Quebec, so it's a little bit different in some ways, but there was that stereotype or the exaggeration. That used to be sort of the baseline, just chill out, have a beer, have a smoke, let's watch the hockey game and shove off, you hoser. Like, that was the baseline Canadian, that we all agreed, no matter where you were in the stratosphere or in the hierarchy of things, that, yeah, we are all kind of a little bit like that. we can kind of see ourselves a little bit in there. And
Right.
we're
Yeah.
fine
You know,
with
you
it.
might be from Quebec and be a Habs fan, or
Quebec would be more like, "Day the Pepsi on the corner, days tabarnak, hey, vas-y toi." But that's the same guy, just in French. But there's that agreed upon thing that we all came from that. There's elements of us in there, and I'm sure in America you have different versions of that as well. But that's important. And if you get rid of that, or if you're trying to say that doesn't apply anymore, well then, like you said, there is nothing Canadian about it.
the second you can have the broadcast in Hindi and be like, they're just as Canadian as you and me. Like, no, they're not. Right? Like, no, there's a fair amount I disagree with Dr. Michael Jones about. Not relevant here, but like, if you don't share the language of the people, you're not Canadian. Like, if you don't speak English or French, you're not Canadian.
Right, and this is where it gets different than a religion, because we're both Christians. I've said quite often that the race of somebody, for me, is not important. Like, it's really not an issue for me, especially from a Christian lens, from a Christian standpoint. But that being said, you have a harder time if you were born a Hindu to become a Christian and live in a Christian land. Like, that's a hard thing in and of itself.
Well, you're translating multiple things. Yeah, there are Maronite Christians, or for the Romans, or for Assyrians, or Oriental Orthodox, Coptic Christians. Like, there are non-European Christians that have a tradition that is understandable and like contiguous. But for the vast majority of people, Hindus are not moving to Egypt by the tens of thousands or the millions. They're moving to Canada and the United States, and those are white countries. So you're moving to a racially different country and a religiously different country, and it's very difficult to translate both those things.
Right. It takes a lifetime. I'm sensitive, because I'm technically an immigrant here in Australia, but I'm very clear about it. Like, I don't participate with Australian politics. I don't really participate with Australian culture in so much as I have to. I'm not trying to change Australia. I'm not. And Australia and Canada are effectively almost the same country in many ways, right? So
the difference, an Australian is just a Canadian that got caught, right? Like, Canada's Nova Scotia, right? Like, it's just a bunch of Scotsmen who moved to a place with, like, we like someplace with miserable weather.
Well, there is one spot down here. If you go all the way to the very tip, Tasmania is actually a bit colder as well, because Tasmania is even closer to the South Pole. But if where I'm at, it's about, I don't know, maybe a 5 or 6 hour drive. But you can get down to essentially the very tip of Western Australia, at which point you're not that far from the South Pole. And a lot of Scots get down there because it's cold and miserable.
Oh, very homely guy.
We can make Australian Scotch, technically, because you can make peat down there. So they have peaty ass Scotch factories. I think it's lovely. It's like, what the Scots are just automatically dry. Oh, is it mildewy? Oh, is it cold and damp? Oh, can you get osteoporosis just by going out on a summer's day? Fine, fantastic. Let's go there. What is wrong with you?
Does it rain all the time?
Brilliant.
Let's go.
That's home. That's home right there.
Right. Right, which is why they did so well in New Zealand and the Pacific Coast of the United States and Nova Scotia, like all these places, right? But this is actually an error that Christians make, to say that like blood doesn't matter at all either, and that's an insane liberal idea. Now, obviously, baptism makes us all part of the church, but grace perfects nature; it doesn't replace it.
Right. I mean, and just to clarify, I would never say that blood or ethnicity or these things don't matter. I'm saying that from a Christian perspective, I'm neutral on it. But from a structural, hey, let's make sure the lights turn on when I flick the lights on kind of matter, then yes, it matters a lot.
Well, it matters how. But in the apocalypse, right, that's very clear. God wants all of the nations to come to him as their perfected form of, this is what a Christian Canada or a Christian Australia or a Christian United States or a Christian Argentina or a Christian Botswana is like. We can, again, have disagreements about the theology or the ecclesiology behind whatever. You're Orthodox, I'm traditional Catholic. There's some pretty substantial disagreements there. But those disagreements are about particulars within the context of being a Christian. Liberalism essentially forces you to apostatize.
Right. This the monad, well, Hinduism and Christianity are essentially the same thing. We're all preaching that, we're all praying to the same
right
divine source, whatever, right? Wazo mush Christianity.
And that's the difficulty right now, is that the vast majority of people who are in Christian churches on Sunday don't know that they're liberals. The great St. John Henry Cardinal Newman was a leading light of the Oxford movement in the 19th century in England, and he wrote a couple really, really wonderful books. Wrote on education, wrote about his conversion, wrote about the development of doctrine. There's a bunch of wonderful, wonderful stuff he wrote. He's a brilliant prose stylist. But one of the things he wrote that just stuck with me in the 20 years since I've read it was just a sort of little thing about how you can be a liberal or you can be a Christian, but you can't be both. And the contradiction was even apparent, 150 years ago when he wrote that. And it's only become more so as time has gone on, right? Father Shepard Rose was writing in the 70s and 80s in the United States, right? I can't remember when.
Well, basically 70s and 80s. Yeah, well, he died in the 80s. I think the bulk of his work came out in the 1970s.
Right, so 50 years ago. So it's been very clear for a century at least, and wise people have pointed this out. Liberalism as such requires you to apostatize not only from Christianity, but it requires you to apostatize from everything. You can't be a Hindu and be a liberal. You cannot be a Buddhist and be a liberal. You cannot be anything and be a liberal, except be a liberal. Because the essence of liberalism is to collapse everything into that monad you talked about it's all just one source, man. And that's just not true, right? Like, I would much rather deal with a Buddhist who says, no, I think you're wrong for these reasons. And we fundamentally disagree about point X, Y, and Z. Because then there's clarity, and we can either just agree or not. The biggest problem you have as an Orthodox Christian is not my 1,000-year-old defense of the Filioque. The biggest problem the Orthodox community has is the Greeks who want to pretend that liberalism and Christianity and Orthodoxy are compatible and are constantly being like, well, I mean, abortion and gay marriage and contraception are okay and perfect Orthodox, and here's why. And then, the more Slavic churches going, whoa, hold on, time out, no, wrong.
I don't go to the Greek church as close. I don't attend liturgy quite often because the only one that's within reasonable distance from me right now is Greek Orthodox Church, and I'm like, no, I will read the liturgy at home. I will attend it in my own way, but I won't do that because I feel after 2020 they did a lot of damage.
Well, of course. Well, look, every liberal bishop in America, actually not just America, in the world, said we're not important. And okay, I believe you. All right, I'll stop going to your services. I'll stop tithing to you. You said you're not important. I believe you. It's the traditionalists that said, no, we'll stay open. We'll hold masses or liturgies in parking lots. We'll liturgy in the gym at the school, 10 a.m. Don't tell anybody. Those people who said, this is so important that it's worth defying the state over and possibly, going to jail. I have a much more respect for the people who, the Protestant pastors who kept their churches open than I do for anybody, who's supposedly on side with me, who closed their churches and denied people the sacraments. I mean, he might be wrong, but he at least believes it. The Bible says we are to gather together to hear the word every week. You can't take no, right? I respect that guy a lot more than I would somebody who would close their church because the flu. The saints never did that. The saints always Saint so-and-so, martyr of charity because he was ministering to the sick during the plague of such and such during, Right.
I think people, for some reason, think that to be a martyr, you have to literally be thrown into a den of lions, by the Romans or something like that. It's no, you can martyr. Martyrdom means standing up, refusing to back down, saying, no, this is the most important thing. Nothing goes beyond this. Nothing is more important than this. And if you're going to have to do something bad to me in consequence, oh, well, I'm covered. And
what's the one thing all saints have in common? One characteristic they all share.
Go ahead.
The love of God. That is the most important thing to every saint. You can see East and West. You can see, well, how did they go through this terrible thing? Innocent of Alaska was eventually Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, but he was the first bishop of Alaska. And he was responsible for missions all the way down to Fort Ross and north of San Francisco. He walked across all of Russia, all the way to Vladivostok, and then got on a boat and then went to Alaska. His wife died. He was bishop and underwent terrible privation and suffering. I've made a study of American saints just because I wanted to know more about all of them. And so, like, the Grey Sisters, right, in Quebec, I can't remember her name now. She was the patron saint of difficult marriages. A lady who was like a widower and just poor, ended up dying in like the Canadian prairies as the foundress of the Grey Sisters in Canada. And they went to the ends of the earth and served all these people who, frankly, didn't really appreciate them much for the love of God. East and West, you can see all these saints who have been canonized, and great personal sanctity, of course, is that's why they're saints. But love of God is the paramount virtue that they have, because they don't do things like undergo starvation for years, like a barely above sustenance level diet and poverty and like being cold all the time. Think about that. You have 2 pairs of clothes and it's like always like 45 degrees and you're just always chilly, and you never really eat a full meal for weeks and months at a time because it's Lent. And so you just don't eat a full meal. You eat enough to keep body and soul together. And you go from Quebec to the Cree Reserve in like northern Alberta, where there's like no trees between you and the Arctic Circle. And the wind comes down just howling 50, 60 miles an hour. And you just suffer to like make sure that people have medical care or can go to school. And, you do it because your religious superiors said, these are the people God needs you to love today. And so you do it. It's hard. It's painful. Certainly not luxurious. And all these saints do it anyway. You and I correspond on a fairly regular basis, and I'm grateful for that. I said in the last Thought Crime Syndicate, like I would die on the left because our society is going to go so vengeful, son, that like all charity is going to be like, congratulations, leftists, you drove charity from the hearts of men. And justifiably, they're going to be like, nope, we're not putting up with this nonsense anymore. And we're going to need saints to call people to repentance and to show the love of God. Otherwise, you're just going to see stuff that would make the Soviet Union blush, I think.
Right, and then always the response. People who don't pay attention to the white and red terror, the actual revolution itself. What was happening in Russia, they were grabbing priests and putting them into barrels with the nails driven into the barrel and then rolling them down the street. So they would tear them apart, melting down crucifixes and making them drink it. Of course, the one that most people know is lining the Orthodox priests up to sign a document saying, serve this new false church, and they would say, glory to God in all things, and get shot and refuse to sign. So what people I think miss with the vengeful son, and my warning is, I said, the danger of the vengeful son is it's going to feel good. It's going to feel just. It's going to feel righteous, because the bad people initially are the ones who are going to get some justice. And that's going to feel really, really good. But the problem when it feels really good is people aren't theoretical. They don't just stop. And again, we're still living in the liberal frame. So there are no brakes on this cart. Once you activate this vengeance and this totalizing violence, which won't always be kinetic, it'll be lawfare, it'll be all the ways you can destroy somebody will be started to be used. And then you let that out in the world with a really good flaming vengeance narrative attached to it.
One of the things that I think you're very good about is like, no, you don't understand. The vengeful son has things to be angry about. Like he's seen like the greatest civilization the world's ever known, like squandered for nothing.
Yeah, that generational betrayal.
I should have known this. The saint I was talking about was Marie Marguerite de Yonville, the founder of the Grey Nuns, Sisters of Charity of Montreal. Anyway, I think you're completely correct that the problem isn't so much that the vengeful son is wrong to be angry. Just think of the justice that's required for COVID. I'm not talking about cultural Marxism, just COVID by itself. Huge numbers of people need to have everything they've ever had taken from them. They need to be reduced to penury. They need to be rusticated and sent out to pasture and never be allowed anywhere near political power again.
And that's the kindness. And what you're saying here, right here, is a kindness.
Right. Right. And a significant number, like if you've killed thousands of people with remdesivir for money, like the United States did, these are my opinions, not Jason's. Jason does not have protection of First Amendment. This is not Jason's personal opinions. CSIS and, Australian federal government. Jason isn't advocating this. This is me, Derek Enlightenment, American citizen who has a First Amendment, saying all this. Huge numbers of people can have everything they have taken from them. Anthony Fauci needs to have every dime he's ever made taken from him, and he needs to have a trial. Now the question then becomes, this vengeful son, without the leaven of Christian charity, there's a whole lot of stuff we know now that is going to mechanistically think or be apparent that there's no solving. How do you deal with the bare fact that the African IQ is in the 70s and that they're not capable of participating in an industrial economy.
Not to mention a technological industrial economy.
Right. Like, how do you deal with that? Now, Christian charity would say, well, we got to find something for them to do. We can't just kill them. But if you've taken away the Christianity, in a sane world, Jason and I would both be, sitting on the deacon's bench, talking to the pastor, acting as elders in the church, because we're, old guys now with kids and stuff who have some things to say that are useful. But you destroyed that. So now there's no mediating institution to say, well, maybe we shouldn't just... Okay, well, you've made everything materialist. You've made everything mechanistic.
Yeah, cause and effect.
If we're all just meat sacks, why would I permit the one dandelion to remain in my lawn? Why wouldn't I just tear them all out by root?
Not only did they destroy Christian charity and kindship, they've also destroyed honor and loyalty. And that's specifically a Western principle. Easterners, like Slavs, it's hard to understand Slavs now because of what communism did. And I only have relationships to even Slavics who had come over. My family immigrated. My grandfather was born in 1916, so it was pre-revolution. But it's a different thing, I think. Slavic society is a bit more slippery. I'm trying to find the right way of saying it, and I'm not trying to be kind. It's just honor and loyalty. Does it exist? Yes. Does it exist in the exact same way as it does in Anglo? No, it doesn't.
Much more clannish and much less high trust.
Right. Like naturally, as a default. Slavs have a lot of trust issues.
Right. I mean, it's positive and negative of Slavic people. Like, if you're in the club, you're in the club, right? You give me 5,000 Slavs who think I'm their bro, I'll take over the world because they'll do anything for you. But if you're not, if you're not one of the bros, I don't know you. Why would I care about you? You're not anything to me. But you can be like, no, I'm your cousin's brother's wife's second cousin. I'm like, paisano, right? Okay.
Well, yes and no, because one piece of advice my grandfather gave me, although he had a very tenuous relationship with even the concept of Slav, but he once told me, if someone ever comes up to you and says, my Russian brother, right, my Ukrainian brother, he goes, watch for the knife in your back. He goes, that's always the first indication. So even within there, there's a lot of calm down on this brother shit. Let's wait, right? It's a different kind of concept. So let's just get back to, because I want to have you for a little bit longer. I just want to say this. I'll shine your shoes for a bit, man. Always a pleasure having you on, man. You are a joy and a gem, sir.
It's bad for my ego for people to be like, yo, dude, No, I'm just a guy that maybe figured some of this out a few years ago and has been trying to spread the good word ever since. But I think it's important for people to realize, with the Trump administration coming in and the vengeful son stuff, I think you're right. It'll feel good because there has been this mass intergenerational theft. I should be mad at people who, in order to go on cruises, destroyed my children's ability to live a life. American public schools, you pay thousands. Australian public schools are probably the same thing, right? Canadian public schools are the same thing, where you pay these thousands and thousands of dollars in taxes, and no conscientious white person can send their child to these schools, right? So you got to homeschool or come up with a scratch for a private school, and you can't use the public school, and they're graduating not people that are going to be productive citizens, but people who can't spell, and we're supposed to just sit here and be like, oh, this is fine. We're supposed to put up with this. We're supposed to just be okay with it. If you do send your white child to a public school, your white child is constantly subjected to racialized violence and unable to learn because they're just bored out of their skull because the teacher's trying to teach 17-year-olds how to spell philosophy. And they, Falosfy. That's happening in American public schools.
That guy's going to MIT.
Yeah, right. And this is that pernicious, evil, vile lie of liberalism that a dude who can't spell philosophy at age 17 is equal to a dude who's doing, multivariate calculus at age 11, and that they're both free and equal human beings who can make equal choices, and they're equal. No, they're not. Are you high? You're in Australia, right? Do they need to tell the Scots who are, happy to be in Tasmania or the lower end of Western Australia, don't rama, don't sleep on the road, don't drink the gas, don't huff the gasoline? Or do they need to tell the Abbas that the vile lie is that they're the same and that everyone's equally Australian, and that a dude who, just came fresh off the boat from Asia with no history of self-government, no history of Republicans' virtue, no history of freedom, is equally capable of small r Republican virtue, and that everyone's Australian or everyone's Canadian. That's absurd. And it's not so much that I want to dislike all these other people who aren't white or aren't whatever, is I just want to stop lying about those people. If you lie about them and you tell the Aboriginals in Alice Springs, the only reason you're not successful is a racist society that oppresses you, which is what the modern liberal says about them, then you're going to just create this massive amount of resentment and hatred. Whereas if you were honest about, look, you guys have IQs in the 70s or in the 60s, you're just not capable of entertaining the kind of thoughts that are necessary, thinking at a level that's capable of earning a living. You guys forgot how to make fire. You forgot how to make fire. Do you understand how fucked up you have to be to forget how to make fire?
I think in their defense, or people how they would defend that is Australia is so dry that if they didn't forget how to make fire, they would have just burnt everything down. I'm like, that's not a defense, right? That used to be their hunting technique. They used to set the forest on fire to drive the game out so they could kill it. It's but now you set the forest on fire. What is going on? Why? Look, I live down here. I've said many, many times very openly, very publicly that I think Australia is one of the most retarded places on earth. I walk out every day and I don't know how any of this works. I have no idea. And I'm talking I don't know why things aren't literally on fire or breaking down or why we have water. I'm amazed every day. Because to understand Australia, you have to understand that it was set up by the British and the Dutch at the same time that Millsian egalitarianism and sort of very Rousseauian liberalism was the operating system. And then they kind of dumped all that here and then they walked away. So imagine if you just had this culture who created the structure and culture based on Millsian egalitarianism and didn't get Mills's note that actually egalitarianism doesn't work. And to steelman them a little bit, early Australians were living in a swampy malaria jungle that wanted to kill them. So I think a little bit of that, hey, we got to make sure everyone gets something or else we're all going to die, makes sense. If that's your starting position. But at some point, you kind of have to drop that and go, well, yeah, but, Yeah.
Does this apply to Scots and Irish and English people? The occasional Italian and German?
It's just the operating system down here. The best illustration I can give you is that they're so egalitarian that if you take two people, right, there's a window looking outside. Someone says it's raining. Someone says the sun's shining. You look out the window and it's the sun shining. But in Australia, you would have to go, well, listen, we better take both their ideas under advisement. It's no, you don't. No, one person's right. The other person's wrong. That's it. Is it raining or is it sun shining? There's no debate. There's no equalization of thought here. It's one or the other. Pick one. Prove it to be true and then go on with your day. But on Australia, everything's got well, we know we have to consider everything. We have to consider both sides. And some things you don't have to consider. We can cut through this a lot faster and get on with our day. I think this is kind of, you just see this in the bureaucracy, you see this in the government, you see this in a lot of things. And I'm talking legitimately entertain some horribly stupid things under the guise or under the necessity of we have to hear all sides. It's no, you don't. You don't have to hear this side. It's retarded. You don't have to even consider giving the Aboriginals a voice in Parliament. That got voted down. It was a national referendum, but it's that's.
And the Liberal Party, the Australian Conservatives, right?
Right.
They're just Manchester Liberals, which is actually maybe a little bit more honest, actually, than the people the Nationalists who campaigned against that saved their nation. Because if you'd allowed that voice to Parliament, it would have destroyed the nation of Australia because it was just purely anti-white Australian.
Oh yeah, and then and of course the people who are championing this from the Aboriginal side are the the one drop kind of Aboriginals.
They have 3 Jewish grandparents and 1/8 Aboriginal, and they're Aboriginals.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the people who are really spearheading it. Oh, it's for Smiling Jim over there, right? The throat wobbler who doesn't even know how to get to Parliament, let alone what to do with it. Yeah, I'm sure you're really concerned about his political aspirations, but
this is again the lie of liberalism. What what is that guy's ultimate good? A patriarchal, paternalistic society that would say, all right, well, we need to have like an exception to the free market for these people because they're not capable of competing with the whole world like it's honest and true. Versus, oh, we should just lower this guy's wages and open the entire labor pool to all of China because this guy, he's a free and equal citizen, and someone who just got a vote from Shenzhen is just as Australian, just as true blue copper as this guy whose ancestors have been here for 10,000 years. No, that's ridiculous. And liberalism is evil because it wants to pretend that all things are the same. And if you want to point out that actually things are different, it won't permit you to discuss it. And I think it's failing all over the world. So it's obviously not working. And I think that that's what they're so worried about right now.
Let's wrap it up, my friend. Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me, sir. I appreciate it.
It's always my pleasure, man. I'm always humbled for you to come on. Just so I guess maybe just one last statement out of you, because I think I understand why people would think it's controversial, but I think it's absolutely true. And I understood exactly what you meant when you said it, that you believe that you'll die on the left.
If I could summarize that as briefly as possible.
Sure.
People, when they've been lied to, in a particularly egregious way, like we all have been politically speaking, they tend to react rather strongly to that. It's like a rubber band that's been stretched too hard to bounce back, right? And we haven't given anyone a transcendent moral authority. The Catholic Church, in my personal opinion, is under the reign of an anti-pope at the moment. Certainly, most of the people in charge are apostates. The moral authority of all the churches has been compromised via the deep state, whether the FSB or the CIA, messing with bishops and meddling in church affairs, so that you see the mess that is the Ukrainian church right now, where there's the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and then there's the Russian side, the Ukrainian side, and whatever. Like, it's all a mess. There's no transcendent moral authority that you can be like, okay, well, these guys are at least being honest. And we're in a state of epistemological crisis right now because you can't trust the media. AI are a thing. They made a movie starring one of the biggest movie stars in the history of the world, Tom Cruise, right? The 1992 election was essentially irrelevant in the United States because George W. Bush, or H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton were both smuggling cocaine into Arkansas. And I'm old enough to remember when, you had to be like a crazy person listening to, Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell at 2 a.m. to learn that information, right? But they just made a movie with Tom Cruise about how, as a matter of fact, Bill Clinton was smuggling cocaine. And H.W. Bush was, in fact, smuggling cocaine. Right? And so there's no source of authority with any legitimacy that can say, stop. Once you deal with the realities of the world as it is, as you deal with the gods of the copy book headings, and you accept the fact that women can't hold public office, they're not physically, morally suited to it. They're sophists. I know you said you were going to talk to my friend Charles Padilla. Charles is one of the wisest men I know. He doesn't hate women. He loves women, and so he's honest about them. But if you can't tell the truth about race, you can't tell the truth about women, you can't tell the truth about politics, the second those truths become necessary and the lies stop, there's no authority to govern that rightful overreaction. And so instead of a paternal father saying, okay, we're going to stop the nonsense, but we're not going to just go crazy, the vengeful son is going to burn the whole house down because he's just been lied to and stolen from and denied a chance at success and denied a life and denied marriages and denied opportunities. And, this truth out there that people are not equal. Okay, well, to steal from a former Orthodox seminarian, when a man causes you a problem, remember, no man, no problem. Niyaki said that we're in that age of total politics. Well, okay, if that frame applies and there's just no way to live with liberals and there's no solution and human dignity isn't a thing because we don't believe in God anymore, then you've opened yourself up to a very, very dangerous, scary potentiality where with 100% justification and 100% accepting reality, the Western world, angry young white men could just wipe everybody else out. The thing about the media, what they do that's so dishonest and so evil, is they accuse young white men of wanting that while pushing them towards it. And I'm deeply worried that they're going to get what they want because they keep pushing for it.
Well, it's Satan chasing out Satan. And this is kind of why I advise people to turn to the prodigal son, the story, and use the prodigal son as a model to return to the Father, to repent and be redeemed, is, I believe, the mechanism that will at least preserve as many people as possible. because once you enter an age of total violence, the demons just want to bring you down. The demons want to destroy you. The demons want your soul. They don't care.
There's no cooperation or charity in hell.
Yeah. They don't care if they get it from wokeism, or they get it from tyranny, or they get it from this, or they get it from that. It's the soul. It's your soul they're after. So don't give it to them.
Amen. Yep, exactly right.
Dark Enlightenment, thank you so much, my brother.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jason. Just a real quick, I will be launching a Catholic show along the lines of Contramundum or a Stone Choir type thing by the end of the year. I'm waiting till I have a few episodes in the can. I just want a fundamental principle. It'll be on Substack and a few other places. Listeners, please keep an eye out for that. And, it'll be on channels, and I'll make sure Jason has it.
What's the name again? Sorry, Fundamental Principles?
Yes, fundamental principle. The fundamental principle. I'll shoot you a link when we've got it live, but that's the plan. And I just think that space was empty and it needed to be filled. I want to thank you for all the work you do. I'm an avid listener. Every time a new episode drops, I listen to it. So, thank you for your good work, and I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jason Marichuk, and it's later than you think.